Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. I'd like to welcome you today to our session, Unleashing the Power of Microsoft 365 and AI. My name is Brandon Peters. I'm a virtual Chief Information Officer based out of Alberta here with F12.net. Got a really exciting presentation for you today, a conversation that we're going to be having amongst our guests. I want to first introduce Michael Contento, who's a business innovation executive here at F12. Michael, I don't know if you want to just share a little bit about yourself and where you're coming from.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brandon. So as a BIE, as we put it, Business Innovation Executive at F12, my core function is really to assist both internally and externally clients which we're going to hear more of, to embrace the art of possible. How do you start working smarter versus harder? How do you embrace the ability to really produce more outcomes with less? So as a business innovation executive, our core responsibility is to support our clients through people like you, VCIO, and really fundamentally help them find that function.
Yeah, and of course, we're not just about doing the work. We are very much facilitators, and we wouldn't be where we are today without great partners like our friends at Punchcard Systems. And we have Estyn Edwards joining us today. Estyn, thanks so much for joining us. I'd love it if you could share, similar to Michael, a little bit about what you do at Punchcard and a little bit more about your business.
For sure. Yeah, I'm Estyn, one of the partners at Punchcard. I'm working with sort of this digital workplace ecosystem since SharePoint 2003. But for Punchcard, like the short answer is we're a digital transformation studio. We have about 45 people across Western Canada, and we're really just helping business leaders reduce the risk of digital transformations. So similar to what Michael's saying, it's focusing on like the business value, the outcomes, not necessarily the outputs. There's always lots of different outputs possible, but it's really identifying the value that we can help and how we can bring that to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a pleasure of working with both Jason and Sam from Punchcard. Had some really great conversations with them, brought them into client conversations. And as much as we know about the Microsoft 365 workspace, it is huge and expanding daily. As we know, they're bringing on more and more things. So it's always been great to have that expertise when it comes to some of the workflows and app dev that your team can bring to us. So we're really excited to have you here today. We're going to be focusing on three different things as we go through the presentation today. First off, we're going to start talking a bit about the digital workspace, what it is, some of the maybe myths about what it can do, or even in some instances where it's maybe being underutilized, a little bit about AI insights, where we think that's going today, and about the CDAP program within the Canadian government. So I do want to let everybody know there is a Q&A section on the right-hand side. We've got a moderator that's checking that, and we'll make sure that the questions come through. So please do feel free to use that. We've got 3 people on the call who love to talk, so we'll be more than happy to take those questions from you as you have them pop into your mind. So, guys, I want to talk about this, and Michael, you touched on it a little bit when you brought up the art of possible, and I know that's something that I don't know, is it fair to call it like your creed a little bit with how you're approaching life? And I love it. Like, I really buy into that. And maybe what you can do is you can tell us a little bit about how that ties into the digital workspace and maybe just in general what the digital workspace is.
Yeah. I definitely could touch on it. And you're absolutely right. It is one of a couple of creeds I live by. And it's so fitting when it comes to digital workspace, because I think what IT does really, really well is that we take words and we make them really big. I mean, and so to an end user, it could be daunting or confusing. And well, what do they mean by digital workspace? Mm-hmm. I work from home, so does that mean I am in digital workspace? And to a certain degree, yes and no. Really, the art of possible, the way I like articulating it, especially when I'm speaking to clients, is if there's a way that we can simplify point-to-point communication, gathering data, sending data, where employees do less manual and less written steps, you're starting to adopt the art of possible through digital workspace. The beauty of it, which Estyn will probably most likely support, is it sounds grand, but it's already at your fingertips. 90% of our clients already have this. They're paying for it. They embraced it. They just haven't unleashed that sort of art of possible within their ecosystem.
If you had to guess, how many people are using it today, or maybe it would be even easier to say how many people that have it aren't using it in this day and age?
Yeah, I don't know what Estyn would say, but I would say fairly low. I would say their file server is still very manual, a very manual process, and they just haven't embraced that sort of art of possible conceptually. Estyn?
I would say Microsoft even did a survey of like how much of the things that you've already paid for you're using, and last year it was 12%. So just thinking about not even buying new things or anything like that, just what you already have, like how much of it are you using? And usually it's 12%, and that's across everything. So like in the small and medium enterprise space, we find it's even smaller. It's like 5%. You've already paid for it, but you don't know that it exists. If you don't know it's there, the unknown unknowns are very hard to execute against.
And I guess there's some instances where it's there, but it's going to take time to get it into practice and develop to the way that it's going to suit your business. And I know that's where you two gentlemen come in and play a big role as well, is helping figuring out not just how to get there, but I think, Estyn, you really touched on it, looking at it as being like an outcome-based presentation instead of it being something that is objective or not objective, but you're not worrying as much about what needs to go into it. You're finding out what they need to put into it in order to achieve their outcome, which I love. I think maybe another quick question on it. Or sorry, Estyn, I don't know if you had something to add on that.
I was just gonna say, like a lot of the times when we see people at the beginning stages, starting stages, they're very product focused. Like we need SharePoint, we need Teams, we need this. But like as you evolve, as you get to understand things a bit more, they start talking about the problems that they're having, and now you're finding solutions and you're leveraging those tools. But the tool itself doesn't bring value. It's the problem that it solves that's really bringing the value. So I love that. That's where, as people evolve, as they get a little bit further down their digital transformation, that's where they need to really focus their attention.
Yeah, I love how complex it can get. Like my favorite example of that is when somebody comes up and says, we need Defender because we need security. And then my question is always like, okay, do you need Defender for endpoint, Defender for business, Defender for Office 365, Defender for cloud, Defender for Azure? Like the list goes on, and it's just so much more than product driven, and finding those outcomes is really the key behind it. Now, Michael, you kind of touched on this a little bit too, about how the IT space likes to push these words out there. Is digital workspace just the latest in buzzwords from Microsoft, or is it something that's really got that meaning behind it? It's not we sell cloud.
AI is the latest, which we'll touch upon in a second. Sure. But if I'll suit, a digital workspace is definitely a big word because there's just extremely a lot of layers and what that really means to each client. I think the biggest challenge is that a lot of clients will typically look at our sort of vertical of support as is our server up and running? Are we protected on our firewall? Are our computers up and running? And really, the empowerment that we need as IT, as Estyn will say as well, as Punchcard and F12 need, is welcoming us to the table when they're talking about business outcomes. We're trying to grow 30%. Yeah. We're trying to cut costs by 10%. And bringing IT to that table, really fundamentally understanding their goals, their initiatives. We can be using digital workspace to kind of support that growth or support streamlining, working smart versus hard, the acronym SMART. Right. So I think it's essential when it comes to digital workspace. Don't focus on the big word, but just empower your IT staff, empower the Brandons of the world to sit at the table and say, okay, Brandon, we have this challenge for 2024. What can you help us with? And enabling you or empowering you, Brandon, people like you and Estyn, will really allow that digital workspace or digital workplace to evolve for our clients.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think it really starts with a conversation. And I know that's been a big part of your approach, Estyn, is your team to get in and start asking questions and really getting to know where they are and where they want to go. Like, would you say that's the biggest part of what you do? Is that I mean, I know it launches what's going on, but I wouldn't say it's possible with them just saying, hey, we need to do better with our ERP or something like that.
I would say the biggest challenge we have is helping clients understand that they need to understand the business value that they're trying to achieve before they start the project. Because if you can't identify the business value, then how are you going to measure success? Because measuring success isn't we implemented Teams and we have chat and we have all this.
Yeah.
Measuring success is that, something else. You've either you've identified a business process and you've automated so that you now have, maybe 30% more effectiveness or something like that. So you really need to identify that value so you can measure that. And again, it just comes back to making sure that you're focusing on the art of the possible. Is the identify that problem, and other people will help you identify what the solution is. But if you come to the table with the solution already, and what you think the solution already is, then you're really narrowing down what you're able to achieve. Because now the only thing that you can achieve is that solution, which could be valuable. But you take the art of the possible into the art of this solution. So keeping that larger mindset is, I think, the biggest challenge that we have, but also the place that we see the most value brought to the table. Because you'll come with a problem, we'll come together with an entirely different type of solution that will work together and figure out. And now you're bringing all these different products together. You're automating processes that were manual before. And now I think you're actually talking about the digital workplace. Digital workplace isn't having these products in place. Digital workplace is automating processes. So that's sort of most people, I think, COVID happened and everything else. Everyone's like, all right, we need Teams, we need this. So we got chat and we're collaborating on files, but we didn't change how we work. We just made a digital version of how we work. The next step is now we need to automate those processes. We need to figure out how to do things differently that take advantage of the digital workplace.
And I think that segues really well into the next conversation, because I always have the conversations with people are about, okay, where can we automate? And at what point do we need to bring in something like AI into the mix here, and kind of explaining that difference. Sometimes when you have a very good automation, it can almost look like artificial intelligence, because it goes, oh, if this file is received with this file name and it's received on this date and time, then we're going to change create a folder. I'm being very, very general and just touching on the very basis of what it can do, but it's oh, it just knows. Well, no, there's algorithms and things running behind the scenes that are determining how that flows. Whereas I would say, and I'd really appreciate your guys is weighing in on this, but AI is much more hands-off when that kind of thing comes in. It knows more what to do with it. What maybe Estyn, we'll go back to you on this one. What do you see as being the biggest difference between automation and automation with AI?
Yeah, I think what we see, we probably in the last 12 months have had, I don't know, 10 to 15 companies come up with AI projects for us. And I'd say 10 of those ended up being just automations. A lot of the stuff that people are in place right now is there's probably a lot of low-hanging fruit. They've really made AI easy, but it's still a fairly big investment. It requires quite a bit of work. Whereas a lot of the time you could do the same thing with the automation, like you're saying. The most common automation we see is creating a Microsoft form that when you fill out, it posts to a planner board and to into a Teams channel. And then you can manage whatever that request or issue was in the planner board, and you can have discussions about it in the Teams channel. And that solves a lot of problems that people think that they're going to need to bring AI in for. That's not to say that AI doesn't have its place. We have built quite a bit of projects with AI. A lot of those are taking things one of the companies takes in emails that are orders. The AI will read the email. It will extract the information it needs to make a quote. It'll generate a quote. It'll pass this quote onto the salesperson. And they're still the human in the loop. They can do the next step, which is send the quote to the customer. So that one, originally we thought was going to be an automation. You can automate some of that, but you need the AI to extract the information from the email. So taking things, quantitative data out of qualitative data, that's fairly challenging to do in any other scenario. But the AI has made that possible now. So it expands, you're talking about that art of the possible. It expands what is possible. Prior to that, that would have been a very challenging problem.
Much more granular then, where it can dive into things that the automation to do the coding, for lack of a better word, but building out those rules in a flow is going to require, X number of lines down there. Whereas you can say AI, this is what we're looking for, and it starts doing it on its own and you run it through its trials and figuring it out. And I think to your point, I mean, what a lot of people will think about in terms of AI is the intelligence piece and not the artificial piece. The fact that it is built off of data, it's built out of input, and it needs to learn. And it's not something that you're just going to go, all right, AI boot up and away we go. You got to start injecting it and training it and getting it to do what it needs to, and really building up that information load. And the data has to be good data. Bad data in results in bad data out. You're not going to spin that into gold. That's not how it works. You've got to figure it out.
Well, I think
and have those
when we talk about bad data, that is one of, I think, the biggest risks with AI is bad data and biased data. And I think the thing that people need to understand is that like all the AIs that exist today are very biased, and by their very nature, like AIs are built so that they learn from themselves. They build their own data and they test against their own data, so they reinforce biases that already exist. So when you're working with an AI, your prompts and everything else need to counteract those biases. So you need to be very aware of what those biases are. And sometimes it's pretty hidden. It's pretty hard to tell. We built an AI that scanned all the political parties' websites, and they could talk to it and understand people's platforms. But it was extremely biased to one party, not because of like the value of what they say, but just the writing style was just aligned with the way the AI liked to parse it. It was very biased, but not in a good way.
No, I can see what you mean with that, but there's lots of good that comes from it. I think we maybe me bringing the doom and gloom about AI and how it can go wrong. Michael, where do you see this stepping in and really adding the value to a business of AI over what we could do with simple automation?
So I'll start off with a couple of step by step first. It goes back to what I originally said: digital workspace, AI, very big words. Just, we do a great job in marketing. All of our vendor partners do an amazing job talking about AI, generative AI, and at the end user, you're right, Brennan, you couldn't have said it better. What does that mean? Is it some fortune teller online or something that's going to predict where we're going? And
yes.
So, when I speak to when I consult with certain clients, I like going back to basics. What is it? Why are we doing it? When are we doing it? And fundamentally understanding, going back to the outcomes. What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to really process faster in a workflow perspective? I would say before we even answer those questions, and just for the record, the what, why, and when goes back to even digital workspace. I couldn't have said it better. Estyn, most of the AI that we will adopt fairly quickly is probably not even AI. It's just a really good automation, a really good workflow that will kind of look like an AI. I would say AI is here and it's going to come on strong because vendors like Microsoft are pushing AI into their applications. For whomever is on the new teams, you'll notice that sometimes you'll clap your hands and something will happen, will pop up automatically on the screen.
Yes.
Or you'll say, that was amazing, congratulations, and you'll see balloons come up. So, Brendan, saying that it's learning, it's all about learning, but without understanding the what, the why, and when are we going to adopt this, that's crucial for any client to really understand it. But before all of that, even when it comes to digital workspaces, it's essential, extremely essential that security comes first. Because digital workspace, AI, all this great initiative to make us work smarter, not harder, as positive as it can be, it also opens a lot of doors to cybersecurity, cyber risk, and all that great stuff. So it's extremely important that when we're talking about these great initiatives, that we always have to keep security prevalent and top of mind, because I think it plays almost a bigger role in adopting these practices.
Yeah, it really comes back to, and I mean, it's funny when we're talking about this in the scope of things like Microsoft 365 and that workspace, you go back, maybe not quite 13 years, but 11 years, 10 years into the advent of Microsoft 365, and the conversation started being, okay, well, wait, where is my data? Where is it hosted? What four walls in which it resides? We had numbers of people within F12 that, until they started opening up their Canadian data centers, it was just a no-go for them. it just could not be done. Medical clients were big ones on that. Eventually, I know they relaxed a little bit, as long as patient data wasn't going out, but then you had to start looking into things like data loss prevention and other things of, okay, well, no, this cannot leave our office and go somewhere else where we don't have control of it. And that's just as true with AI. You've got to be able to do that investigation into the business you're working with, know where it's hosted, know what their policies and procedures are before you start pumping in, say, critical client data or your own intellectual property, pricing tables or formulae or whatever it might be into that product. And Estyn, how does your team deal with it when we're talking about a cybersecurity side of things? Like to Michael's point, I think that's got to be on the forefront of everybody's minds when they're approaching you in the first place. What are the types of questions you like to ask, or do you recommend people look into when they're approaching something like this?
I think every company needs to have an AI policy. So it doesn't need to be super complicated. It doesn't need to be too much. But like, there's a lot of issues with AI. There's a lot of benefit with AI as well. But there's two areas where we see potential like cybersecurity issues. One is oversharing. So right now inside your SharePoint, your OneDrive, and all this, you probably have documents that maybe don't have the right security on them, but it doesn't matter too much because no one could find those documents. As soon as you have like Microsoft Copilot, you ask it a question, it finds the answer wherever the stuff is. So like that exposes the oversharing. And then the other side of things is if you're using something like ChatGPT and you're not paying for it, well, if you're not paying for it, your data is being mined. So with all the different AIs that are out there, if you're not paying for it, your data is being mined. And if you are paying for it, it still might be being mined. You need to really check the whatever your agreement is. Right. So I think companies need policies in place to say, hey, these are the ones that are acceptable for people to use with this level of data, and these are the ones that aren't. So you need at least to have, basic from a policy level, that level. And then we work through our clients. There's 12 items we say that a policy should have. And then for each of those items, you can decide how important it is and how you want to manage that. But it's things like security, privacy, like does a human need to be in the loop? Right. What's the accountability? What's the ethical alignment? What sort of training do you need to have before you can use it? So there's things like that you can have in your policy. But I think fundamentally, even if you don't have a complicated policy, you just need a blanket statement. Don't use or do use these ones. Don't use any ones that we're not paying for as a company that aren't inside of our governance. I think that would be the starting point for anything, and then you could build on top of that.
Right. And would you see it going down to, you mentioned which ones are available to use, I would assume as well that it would be down to the level of this is the kind of data that can go up there. This is the kind of data that must absolutely not go up there. And then looking into, I mean, there's two pieces. And when we're talking about it in the context of technology, it can always be aided by technology, but you do need to have that written policy. And then if you're really concerned about certain data leaving your organization, start looking into the technical policies that can block that, or at least alert if some of that data is being exited from the organization. I
would just mention the one thing that people probably don't know they have already, like Bing, search, but they have Bing Chat Enterprise that Microsoft released. It's included in all the E licenses, and it's powered by ChatGPT 4, and it has those privacy guarantees built in. So if you have nothing else in place, but you have an E license, you could have a blanket statement like, don't use anything other than this one. You have one that you're already paying for, and it has privacy guarantees. And you may not know it exists.
Right. And in that case, it's probably already built into some of your policies, or at least some of the acknowledgments that you've made when you signed up for that platform in the first place. So there's some additional coverage, I guess, maybe not quite there. I love your suggestion about just get it on paper. I think whenever I'm writing something, that's always the biggest challenge to get it started. If only there was something that could help me with that.
Ironically.
It's here. Yeah. And honestly, where I am starting to use it more and more often is to get things off the ground. Let's get something started, get something on paper, and kill the procrastinator that lives inside me.
And I think what's crucial, Brendan, is that maybe a lot of users might not know what AI even is, and they may be using an app online that is driven by AI, and they probably don't get that it's AI. So
Yes.
the policy is extremely important to really fundamentally. It's more about teaching the users. Our number one defense, our weakest point in security is education. If we don't teach the users by these policies, then sometimes they may be opening the door by accident. It's not that they're doing it on purpose. And there's a lot of applications coming out with AI in the background. And so again, what I was trying to drive earlier is that AI is here, generative AI is here. It's not going anywhere. If anything, it's going to be really pushed faster and quicker on applications. And I think it's important that we embrace the security of it as soon as possible.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, to that end, I know we at F12, we had a promotion that we were doing in October for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We are pushing it into November now because of some of the interest that was generated as part of this. So feel free to go to our website, and we do have under our referral section details about our exclusive MDR offer. You can find that on our website. I believe there might be some information shared along with this invite as well. And we encourage everybody who has any interest in that to go look at this to really get a good understanding of not just what's going on within your office and on your endpoints, but also within your cloud architecture, whether that's AI, Microsoft 365, or beyond that. I mean, software as a service is also something that's very much here. We know how much vendors want to move towards a subscription model. Software as a service, cloud software really lends itself well to that. So always be aware of those elements too.
We just added it to the chat, Brandon. So
perfect.
The link's in the chat for anyone that wants to see the offer.
Excellent. Maybe one more thing on AI before we move on to our last topic here. And going back to you, Estyn, maybe some examples, high level. We don't want you to disclose anything classified, but any examples of where somebody has used AI successfully when you've worked with them in that capacity.
Yeah, we've built quite a few AIs, mostly building off of like OpenAI. The company has, like, they're the ones that produce ChatGPT, but they also provide APIs for developers, and those APIs are have even more functionality than you can get through the chat. And you can also access all that through Azure. So you're able to access it through Azure, and when you access it through Azure, Microsoft gives all the privacy guarantees. And when you do it directly through OpenAI, they give you privacy guarantees, but they don't give you the extra stuff that Azure gives you. So, like I was saying, like, we built the app that reads the emails and builds quote. We have a bot that exists in Teams that will read your entire SharePoint intranet, like all the information about that, and then you can ask the bot questions, and it will act like ChatGPT. But if you ask any questions related to your company, it will then answer you based on the information that's within your intranet. And the thing that makes that a bit more powerful than the classic search is that it can combine multiple documents together. So if you have, your glasses policy on your intranet, but you also have a PDF that is like the very detailed answer, you can ask it a question. It will give you information from both, and then give you the links so you can actually see where the information came from, because it's pretty important to know that the information is actually coming from your intranet.
Yeah.
It isn't falling into the trap of, sometimes if you ask ChatGPT a question, it'll just make up an answer. If it doesn't know the answer, it'll just make it up. They call it hallucinations. And there's been some very big examples of that happening. But I think with a little bit of training, people realize that if you just simply ask it not to lie, don't make things up, it won't. So it's people need to know how to use it. So that kind of goes in, like, you can build all these bots and everything, but you still need to, people need to be informed, and people need to understand how they work a little bit under the hood to know that prompt generation, asking the right question for a GPT to answer correctly, is very valuable. I think that's actually like where a lot of companies are going to get a lot of value is bringing AI into their culture a bit, like changing the culture from, does it need to be a big project to bring AI in and build a whole bot, or is it our department is going to have access to this general AI. We're going to have a little bit of training on how to use it. And now anytime that something comes up, well, now we know how to implement ourselves. We don't have to go to IT because it's not implementing a whole system. It's taking advantage of the things that are already ahead of us and that we have and probably already paying the license for. So a little bit of a culture shift, because I think right now there's a little bit of fear. Is it going to take my job? I think companies as a whole need to think about that, because I think long term, it will take a lot of jobs. but short term is going to be complementing a lot of jobs. So the
Yeah.
next 2 to 3 years, you're going to be a lot more effective. Beyond that, it's going to get good enough that you're going to have to think about, like, from a company perspective, where are you going to shift your resources? Because some of those resources now could be doing other things. They won't need to be doing that at all.
Yeah, I always like to point out, like, some of the more mundane things that it can take away from you, from data entry to data extraction, which can be even more like reading pages upon pages. I know with certain maybe legal documents where you're trying to find something very specific to reference, or on the data entry side of things for finance, for medical. I know that we've seen doctors that are using it for assistance with patient chart reading or record, bringing all that into one space and being able to compare those much more simply. I know there was a question that came in as well, and I'm not as familiar with the ChatGPT side of things in particular. I've lived mostly in the Copilot world so far. Somebody was asking where specifically you can go to access the ChatGPT side of things privately. I think when you were talking about, Estyn, about where you can sign up for it and what the difference is and how to do that.
Yeah, so there's a few different ways you get ChatGPT. So ChatGPT, there's a free version, which everyone can access, and there's no privacy guarantees. There is the paid version on an individual basis. So it's $20 a month, US dollars a month. And that one does have the privacy guarantees. And then there's an enterprise version. And the enterprise version is more expensive, but you can cover your entire organization and give everyone access. So those are like the things that are offered from ChatGPT. And then Microsoft has introduced their Copilot suite of tools. That one is $30 per month, but you have to be a fairly large organization. You have to have 300 seats. And that's in addition to whatever your e-license is. And then there are a few other tools available as well that aren't ChatGPT, but Bing, like I was saying. So Bing Chat, if you use that, that has, again, no privacy guarantees, the regular Bing Chat, but it does have access to the internet. So it searches things for you and brings back the answers. And then Bing Chat Enterprise is something your IT has to enable, but that's effectively the same thing as Bing Chat, but they give you the privacy guarantees. So I think those are the easy ones to implement right away. There's a bunch of other tooling that's much more niche and specific to specific verticals that are even more powerful in those verticals, but aren't necessarily applicable across organizations. The only other one I'd say that's it's become, you've heard a lot about maybe, is the original Copilot was the GitHub Copilot. That was for aiding coders. Right. We implement that across our organization, and we're estimating about a 20% productivity increase. So that's a pretty significant increase for the $30 a month that we're paying for it. So I would certainly think if you have in-house development teams, definitely look at that one.
For sure. Awesome. So to clarify, I think just to make sure that question got answered, is ChatGPT website, you're looking at the private version, it's the paid version, which is around that $20 US.
Right, and it was added to the chat. So
perfect.
Someone added it to the chat, and that's the exact link. Exactly.
Perfect. Thanks for confirming that. Thanks for getting that in there. That's excellent. And now I love this part about working with Punchcard, and I'm going to absolutely turn this floor over to you, Estyn, as we start talking about CDAP, because my education comes pretty much exclusively from Jason over the last few months. So I would not do it any kind of service that it deserves. But when we're talking about these engagements, there's cost that goes with it, whether it's on some of the labor time that goes into it up front, if there is new technologies, new hardware that you need to bring in, new equipment. But there are ways that you can get help with that. And one of those new platforms, I mean, I don't know how long it's been around for. I'll let you answer that in a moment here, Estyn, but it is the CDAP program, Canadian Digital Advisor Program, which does provide a interest-free loan to businesses, small, mid-sized businesses within Canada. Maybe if you can talk a little bit more about your team's role in that, Estyn, and how you approach that.
For sure. Yeah, so the Canadian government set aside $4 billion to help companies with their digital transformation, getting up to speed, moving into the digital space. And there's two things that companies get out of that. Is they get a grant for $15,000 to work with a CDAP advisor, and we're one of those CDAP advisors. And then after you complete that, you also get a $100,000 loan through BDC. It's available to all the Canadian companies between 1 and 500 employees with at least $500,000 in revenue in one of the last 3 years. So what we do there is that's a way to offset the risk of your digital transformation. So our role in that is helping you build the roadmap. So our obligation to the government is to provide that roadmap, show that we've shown you a way to take either a specific business process. So there's something you want to automate, something you're doing, paper-based now, or even doing digitally now, but haven't automated. Or if you're looking at like a broad picture broadly from your company, how do we move forward? What are the steps we need to do? And then a lot of that would be working with partners like yourself, because often they'll need to cybersecurity is an example of one of the things that is going to come up on every roadmap and is very important to do.
Yeah.
Not something we do, but something that we work with someone like yourselves to do. But really, it's helping de-risk that move. So the government sort of identified that a lot of organizations aren't making the jump, and they're losing a lot of opportunity and losing to their competitions in the US and stuff, because Canadian companies are a little bit more risk averse. So by taking away some of the monetary risk there and giving a more structured process, it gives a way for these companies to move forward.
Well, and obviously you're going to need capital to get it started, and that's where a lot of the risk lies. So if you can take away that need for capital and move it into more of an operating cost that can run over the course of, is it 3 years typically for the payback, or what was the term on that typically?
I believe it's 5, but I'm
5
not
years?
certain. It might be 3, but I thought it was a 5-year.
No, I definitely put you on the spot for that. I couldn't remember, but over that time, I mean, now you're changing up the way your company does business, and you're being able to get to the point where you're realizing that 20% efficiencies that you're talking about month over month, and you're going to start bringing in more revenue to your business. You're going to have lower costs, lower COGS as you're moving towards some of these tasks. I mean, to your point, Estyn, around what you can do with AI today being more about not supplanting jobs, but aiding them and making them more efficient and a little bit less mindless, hopefully, is really where you're going to see that benefit. And this is the type of thing that can help you get that off the ground and start moving forward towards that journey and getting that moving. So I'm a huge fan of this program and trying to get that put in place.
Hey, Brandon, I was glad that you circled back to the whole role displacement or job supporting jobs. I'm more the half glass full type of guy, and I don't think AI is necessarily going to reduce employment. I think it's going to kind of empower people that have, you use the word mundane, that have those mundane roles to accelerate and get more of a mainstream role, more professional. So I look at it a bit differently. It's not that it's going to reduce the workforce. It's just going to reduce those mundane roles, which will empower people to do more, which will empower people to go more. So I'm all for AI. I don't like kind of communicating that it's going to reduce roles. I think it's going to empower roles to grow, people to grow.
Yeah. Well, I think the other question we had back in the start of the month at an event we had here in Calgary was around whether we think that AI is going to be the death of creativity, of human creativity. And I firmly believe the opposite. I think it's going to free the mind from the mundane. I love that word, Michael. It's going to open you up to, I'm not going to have to go in and type in this person's name, this person's customer ID and punch all this in over and over and over and over into field upon field upon field. And I can start moving my minds and my thoughts towards things that are more creative, whether that is creative in the sense of artistic or in terms of business. I mean, they both take that same part of your brain, and it's going to really help people come alive, I think, in that aspect.
I think the other thing that, at least in Microsoft, they always say like 60% of the jobs that people are doing today didn't exist 40 years ago. Yeah. So
social media manager.
AI is going to push that forward. Like there'll be new jobs. It will take over some, like responding to emails with like support requests. I firmly believe that's going to be gone. Like that will be fully automated. But that opens up all these new opportunities. Who's going to be the prompt engineer? Who's going to be the people doing like setting up that? Who's going to be like, it just opens new opportunities.
Yeah. Another good example for it is something that we're looking at bringing in over the next few weeks here at F12 is phone systems that can start learning and being able to get our customers to the right department more quickly. I know there was very recently, even I think yesterday, where somebody was trying to reach support and ended up in sales because calling trees are fun. No matter how much effort you try and put into them and try and plan it out. I know we had an example a few years ago where our calling tree after hours said, "Thank you for calling F12. We are now closed." And the fall off rate for our calls, because they just said, "We are now closed." Ah, darn it. And they hang up. The next words on that were, "However, we still have somebody here to assist you." And we didn't have that artificial intelligence to come in and take over that call and find out really what they're trying to achieve, and getting it to the right place with the right urgency and doing some of that triage for us in the first place. If you guys are good, maybe with the last few minutes we've got here, we can shift over to Q&A. There's a question that just came in around how you avoid oversharing with AI so you don't end up with cybersecurity concerns and risks.
I think the oversharing is like oversharing specifically is usually associated with like having an AI scan your environment. And what that means is you have to have your environment set up well. So if you've gone, like a lot of times we help a lot of companies move from a migration from the file server into like a SharePoint environment. And a lot of times they say, "Oh, just keep the same permissions and we'll just move forward from there." But like then you look into what the permissions are and it's like, well, you really don't have any. This file has this. Like it's all over the place. So having a consistent file sharing policy, a consistent way that you're doing your governance, means that the AIs that like Microsoft is building out will respect them. So if you set up your security properly, it will respect that. But if you haven't, it will expose that. I will say the other thing is you could do like there is higher levels of information protection available. You can like various ways you could take things, sensitivity levels and stuff like that, and add encryption. That is also respected. So if you're in a scenario where you're very concerned about oversharing within your organization, not with an external AI, then it might make sense to bring information management into place beyond just the document management. So it's an extra level on top, and it's a bit more complex, a bit more work, but fundamentally not that hard. And depending on where you're licensed, you may already have that licensing in place too.
Yeah, it's other licensing that's in place for a lot of the enterprise platforms within Microsoft as well. I think starting back, I believe it had it in the Office 365 E3, and then I know it includes
E3,
that
E5.
going in for the E3, E5 on the Microsoft.
Which you may need, but
yeah. So for those of you who are like, "Oh, that sounds familiar. I think I might have that." Yeah, definitely understand the products and what you have on that side of things. There was another quick question that came in about comparing Copilot. I'm assuming to something like ChatGPT. I can't remember if you'd mentioned, Estyn, but there's a link to those two products already. But is there a big difference in how they function at a high level?
So they both use the same model under the hood, but the really big difference is Copilot is going to be working against your own enterprise data. So it will know about, like, technically it uses anything in the Graph API, but the Graph API is the underlying API layer that connects SharePoint, Teams, channels. It's where your mail exists. It's where your identity exists, all your identity information. So if you ask Copilot, like, a question about, this financial document, it will know who it'll go up the chain inside of your organization, who's the closest financial person to you. It could look at their documents. It could look in the financial section of your OneDrive. It could look in the financial section of your SharePoint, of your Teams. So it knows all about your organization, which makes it very valuable for finding internal information. It has the same level of intelligence, the exact same model is ChatGPT. So if you don't need to access your internal data, then ChatGPT would probably be a more economical way. It's a little bit less expensive. It's also available to organizations that are smaller, but you'd want to be using the paid version so that, if one of your users asks a question about your financial or something like that and puts in information that's protected, then you don't want that indexed for the next version of ChatGPT. You want that in your private repo.
For sure. Awesome. Thank you. Got another question here. Somebody's really happy to see Michael again, which I don't blame them. It's always a pleasure. They're asking, with Microsoft being a proponent of citizen development, they're thinking that might lead to software silos. As an enterprise, how do you make sure that you have good governance in place, but at the same time empower use?
Oh, that's a great question, actually. So I think it goes back to our earlier discussion. It is really empowering people like yourself, Brandon, people like myself, sitting with the clients of the world, like Citizen, for instance, and understand what they're trying to achieve, why they're trying to use the application, and when it will be a good time doing it. So it's all, the governance part is all two things. Is let's train as much as possible. Let's make sure the staff understands what applications we're using, what applications we're going to use as tool sets within our network, and really the why. Like, how are we going to use it? Why are we using it? So I think it's not as easy as an answer. I think it's really going back to the fundamentals on, why are we using it? What are we using? And how are we going to use it? That answering those very basic questions will start putting governance within your own organization. That, coupled with that sort of AI policy that Estyn mentioned before, I think will be crucial. It's just bringing this all together. It's will essentially build that governance for your organization. So I know it's a bit more of a vague answer, but unfortunately, we're talking about a very complex system here. So there's a few pieces to that puzzle to get that going.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to that is really it comes down to, I mean, Estyn said it best when you're talking about outcomes, and you figure out not just what the outcome should be, but how to measure this outcome and the value that it's bringing into your business. And then you can use that to offset your risk and start figuring out what the risk would be and moving in that direction. Because you're right, it's a wonderful question. It rings true for so many aspects of business, even beyond something like AI, where okay, you want to stop getting phishing emails? Well, we can guarantee you'll get 0 phishing emails from now on if we just block all of your emails. But okay, we can't do that. So where's that middle ground, right? How do we avoid being extreme so that we're not Fort Knox, but we're the next best thing or darn close to it?
Yeah.
A question here as well about the people that we're finding that only 12% of organizations organizations are only using 12% of what they're currently licensed for in Microsoft 365 space. And what are some examples or projects that people can do to unlock the other 88%?
I think going back to what Michael had just said, it's what is the business value that you're missing out on? So like, what are the problems that you're having in your organization, and then look to see how you might be able to use that. But like from a product perspective, like the places we see that low hanging fruit is planner boards. Flows are really good for automations. Yeah. Power BI for reporting, and then Teams I think is underutilized in general because people use it like chat, maybe files, but Teams, like the app ecosystem in Teams is very large and very capable in a lot of ways. So I think those are probably the low hanging fruit. But again, I would say you really want to focus on like look at your business processes. Identify opportunities to automate first, and then second, if you can't find an easy way to automate, look at it. Could AI help you with them? And like systematically, like in the Microsoft's got a governance structure, and like at the beginning is like walk, crawl, run, exceed, and stuff like that. Like at the top level, they say like it's a systematic approach, reviewing all your policies on a regular basis for any process that you can automate, any process that you could apply AI to. And once you have that culture in place, then you're going to find that those very quickly are utilizing the rest of the products that are available to you.
Yeah, and I would add to that, as we're moving away from the productivity side and focusing on the cybersecurity components as well, some of the things you mentioned, like Azure rights management, information protection practices, data loss prevention, certain other elements within some compliance structures that exist within there. Absolutely sit down with your consultants, with your account executives, and work with them and figure out some of the details. And that's where people like myself, Michael, and eventually Estyn and his team can come in and start consulting on these elements depending on which route you're trying to go and what you're trying to improve.
Yeah, Brandon, I think Estyn earlier said it perfectly. It can start as basic as a form. My issue with when people like us just say a form, clients fundamentally think just of a simple form. It's not the form itself that is really going to do the breakthrough. It's what happens when that submit button hits. And when that submit button, the way the data is gathered, the way it's getting published, where it's going, how it's going. We had one particular client, a project management team, that that one submit button will save close to 3 hours each time they hit it. So it's really streamlining the efficiencies of each role. And now that as I said earlier, that project manager is empowered to do more, faster, easier. So it's, yes, a form sounds easy, but it's the art of possible, the form. When you hit the submit button, what happens to that data and how it's being collected and ingested into the system. So that's why it's extremely important to come and chat with people like us.
Yeah, and I mean, if it's something where they enter it into the form and all it does is generate an email to the person that would normally be receiving that email in the first place, all you're doing is really giving them the questionnaire and giving them the structure. Yeah, 100%. It's the things that happen behind the scenes that I think people don't know exist, or if they do, not how quick we can go. So I want to move on to what looks like our last question here. Question from Greg about data retention. The data retention and classification have been on our radar for a while. What is possible today in terms of automation or AI for data retention and classification?
Wow, that's a big one.
So Microsoft has had sort of labeling, classification, protection already in place for quite a bit of time, and you can automate that today based on sort of these rule-based engines. But they also have a connector that allows you to connect to effectively their AI, and you can build rules inside of that as well. So you can automate the classification to a large extent, and it is, I would say that the rule-based ones they have are like 80 to 90% effective, and then the AI is probably like, I don't know, 70%. But you have the rule first, and then you fall back on, like, if you can't auto-classify with the other one.
Right.
You can't automate everything, but you can automate a large chunk of it, especially things like emails and stuff like that, stuff that is going to be generated in large volumes and aren't documents, aren't things that you could systematically review. That's where the auto classification becomes very useful.
Yeah, and I think the key thing with retention that I always run into, and when people think about retention, is how long I need to keep documents is, I think, the general term. And maybe they're all glass half full like Michael. I tend to also be that way as well, but this is one case where I try and think on the other side, on the negative side as well, which is how long until I can delete these documents. And I think that's something that gets overlooked in many cases as well, because if you have that document and you get audited, it is part of your audit, and you are only obligated with CRA, for example, to keep it for 7 years. Documents that you keep for 8 years, 10 years, if you're audited, are still admissible. So you need to make sure that you're writing these policies and then leveraging some of the tools that Estyn mentioned around data classification and working on that for your retention policies, that you're coming at it from both ends. Email, you're right. Some of those things, I think, from my experience, I would agree with you, Estyn, 100%. You're going to be relying more on the automation first and then using the AI as more of the safety net, because that automation's been there for a lot longer. It's been reworked and solidified much more over time, even to something as simple as how archiving works and in the Exchange Online portion, so that emails are now stored essentially alongside without having to get pulled down onto a computer based on certain things that you're writing into these classifications.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Microsoft Purview is the underlying thing that does a lot of this. That's a perfect example of one of that other above 12%. Like, if you're having one of the enterprise licenses, you already have, depending which license you have, you may already have access to this and probably aren't using it all and never turned it on.
Right. Yeah, 100% agree. I think there's still people that want to have their mailbox or their mail in their mailbox as well, and they don't realize what it means now to pull it out of there, and so they don't explore that route, and you end up going the path of, oh, I need to pay more for a bigger mailbox, and that might not be the case. Excellent. Yeah. Gentlemen, we've exceeded our time. I appreciate everybody who stuck around and listened for the extra 10 minutes here. Anything either of you would want to close out on, or anything a bit about your business, Estyn or Michael, your role and where people can reach you?
I don't mind kicking off. Yeah, I hope all users, all end user clients that were able to join us, thank you, first of all. I welcome each of you to give us a call on two fronts. One is how can we help you with the art of possible? How can we engage to make you guys achieve your outcomes, annual outcomes? And more importantly, how do we make sure you're protected? You know, our focus is a zero trust tolerance environment, and it's important that we make sure you're protected. So
when can we
I
expect
hope-
your next book, Art of Possible, on shelves?
That's right. My next book will be Art of Possible.
Perfect. Estyn, over to you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Like I said, yeah, thank you everyone for coming, and thank both of you for inviting me here. I would say that if there's anything that we can help you with, reach out to your F12 representative, and they'll get us in touch, and we'll work together to make sure that we find the right solution to the output for the outcomes that you need.
Yeah, always a pleasure working with you guys at Punchcard. You are very much professionals in your space. You know very well what you're doing, and it's been a very fruitful relationship. We look forward to continuing it in the future. Awesome. Thanks everyone for coming. It's been wonderful speaking with you today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank
Have a
you.
great